Good morning, everyone. 9 o'clock here in our nation's capital. President Trump firing back at critics, and now today the White House back on the offensive, putting out a talking points memo to conservative allies saying the president was entirely correct, in quotes, to blame both sides for the deadly violence this past weekend in Charlottesville. This story lives another day as we say good morning to you at home and at work and on your mobile device. Split show today. I'm Bill Hemmer live in Washington. Shannon, good morning to you.
Good morning. We are everywhere that you are. Yes. I'm Shannon Bream in New York City. That memo, by the way, part of an effort to get conservatives to defend the president, saying he's been a voice for unity and calm. It comes after seemingly off-the-cuff remarks at yesterday's contentious news conference that was supposed to be about infrastructure. The president giving new fuel to his critics while answering reporters' questions. Listen.
As I said on, remember this, Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And then I went on from there. Now, here's the thing. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt? What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country.
So with that as a backdrop from yesterday, David Lee Miller reporting live this morning now, live outside of Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan. David Lee, we'll start with you. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. That contentious news conference taking place just a day ago, but the White House apparently not backing down, as you point out. The talking points memo mentions the fact that the president says he has called for the end of violence on all sides so that no more innocent lives will be lost. The memo says, quoting now, the president condemned with no ambiguity the hate groups fueled by bigotry and racism over the weekend and did so by name yesterday, but for the media, that will never be enough. The memo then goes on to say that the media reacted with, quote, hysteria over the idea that counter-protesters showed up with clubs. Quoting the White House memo again, from cop killing and violence at political rallies to shooting at congressmen at practice baseball games, extremism on the left have engaged in terrible acts of violence. At his news conference yesterday, the president accused the left of trying to revise history.
Many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
The White House memo says that the president is taking swift action to hold violent groups accountable. But nevertheless, Bill, there has been withering criticism of the president, not just from Democrats, but from Republicans as well. Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio tweeted out that white supremacists should not be assigned only part of the blame. And a former presidential candidate, Republican Mitt Romney, sent out a message to say that the two sides are not the same. He says one supports racism, the other opposes it. He says they come from completely different moral universes.
David Lee, thank you. David Lee Miller starting our coverage this hour in Midtown Manhattan. Thank you. Shannon.
Well, meanwhile, happening overnight in Baltimore, crews removing 4 Confederate statues. City Council unanimously approved the plan Monday after the weekend's deadly events restarted conversations about the fates of those statues. The vote ending more than a year of indecision. The mayor of Baltimore saying the quick overnight action was done for safety reasons and to avoid any conflict.
Also from North Carolina now, authorities arresting a college student who helped bring down that Confederate statue in Durham. This was the scene 2 nights ago. That is the arrest of Takia Thompson, arrested after activists held a press conference at North Carolina Central University yesterday. She's charged with participating in a riot and felony property damage. She admitted in a press release to tying the rope around the statue's neck, and that's when the Durham County Sheriff vowed to charge those responsible to the full extent of the law, end quote.
Well, Bill, over in Lexington, Kentucky, police are telling Fox News they're teaming up with the FBI and other federal agencies to help prevent any riots from turning deadly. Comes after the white supremacy groups have announced plans to protest the removal of Confederate statues at the courthouse. Matt Finn is tracking it all and joins us live from Lexington. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Shannon. Well, it's calm and peaceful now, but Lexington is bracing for trouble, and it's all to do with the potential removal of these two Civil War era statues here at the courthouse. After the deadly riots in Charlottesville, Lexington's mayor tweeted he was going to accelerate his announcement to ask council members to have these statues removed, and that apparently triggered white supremacy groups to come here. We spoke to the mayor and asked him if he thought the timing was right to draw attention to this issue, and we also spoke to the police chief to ask about safety plans.
We're absolutely not sanitizing, and we are not destroying. We're putting these statues in the proper context, out of the center of the city where they're being glorified today.
Our role is to protect people's rights, First Amendment rights, constitutionally. If we see violence or we see an assault occur, we will make an arrest on either side.
The mayor said the timing is always right to do the right thing. Here's a look at the other statue. This was once a slavery auction site. Now, last night, council voted unanimously to move ahead with plans to relocate these statues. Neighbors are already complaining they don't want the statues in their neighborhood. The city still doesn't have an estimate of the cost to remove them, and we are also keeping our eye on a rally here in the state's capital in Frankfort. There are people protesting today to have all Confederate-era statues removed statewide here in Kentucky. Shannon.
All right, and we know you'll stay on it. We'll check back with you. Matt Finn, thanks so much.
Let's get some analysis now. Thank you, Shannon. Katie Pavlich, Fox News contributor, editor for townhall.com with me in studio, and good morning to you. It was clear he was trying to call out the left yesterday as lawbreakers,
right.
And that was intended. But with it comes everything else that followed on as we watched together.
Well, I think what followed on as a result of him not coming out initially on Saturday and condemning white supremacy and the neo-Nazis who were there. But when you look at who he's specifically talking about, it is important to remind everybody of who he's specifically condemning here. There has been a far-left violent movement in this country for years. Most recently, we've seen it come into the form of a group called Antifa. They were there on Saturday. A New York Times reporter tweeted that she saw them there with clubs. The ACLU chapter who was there also said that they were there fighting with the white supremacists in the park. Now, we're in this situation where we're looking at both sides and going, neither one deserves any kind of sympathy. But for the left to ignore the fact that there has been a lot of violence coming from their side doesn't get us to this place where we can condemn neo-Nazi white supremacist violence and also condemning very, very violent acts that have happened on the left, especially since President Trump was elected and inaugurated, whether it's smashing windows, whether it's firing fireworks at campus buildings against speakers, conservative speakers they find to be offensive. That cannot just go uncondemned and non-talked about just because it's inconvenient to the left.
You try and get into the thought process of decision-making this past week. On Tuesday, you go after the left. On Monday, he went after the right. He could have left that statement on Monday where it was.
Which he probably should have. I mean, that's probably something he could have done. He made it clear on Saturday that he wanted to condemn all sides of this. But the truth is that there is a far left movement that was there on Saturday that we're seeing in the country. And as long as we see the far right clashing with the far left, and we have to talk about this, we have to remember that this is not a representation of the country as a whole. This is a representation of these two far right and left wings groups trying to get the attention to make it seem like this is where we are as a country. I think the president did what he could to say we have to be unified in condemning both sides, but the left cannot just conveniently ignore their side of the situation because they don't like what the president has to say.
Listen to this also from yesterday, which was apparent to me and many others that he was trying to make this point. Watch.
You had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story.
He does not do nuance. Never has. That's about as close as he will come to it.
First, I will say there is a logical, academic, valid argument to keeping these statues up and not just taking them down. But to take the side or to imply that somehow these neo-Nazi groups, which they are, that organize this protest of renaming the park, taking down the statue, is not exactly the best way to go about it. The second thing is, in terms of moving forward of how to deal with this, the White House can simply say the Department of Justice has opened up a civil rights investigation. They are going to go at the case with the full extent of the law and prosecute as many people as they possibly can. The FBI has been assigned, as we saw in the reporting, to make sure this violence doesn't happen in other cities across the country, and let it be, because he can't win with the media, he can't win with the left. He made his statement on Monday, and now he's going to end up spending the week cleaning up his statement, even though he did condemn both sides, and there is responsibility on both sides.
Sorry for the interruption. You could also call on the governor to tell us how the police responded or did not respond that day. Quickly, there is breaking news from the White House. Hope Hicks, longtime aide, assistant with the president, will be the interim communications director of the White House. Fox News confirming that a moment ago. What does that mean to you?
I'd like to see the job description, because I don't think it's going to be a traditional White House communications director position. She's very close to the president. She knows how he operates. It'll be interesting to see how she works with the new chief of staff, John Kelly, to get to the president and to make sure the messaging is on par. So it's a big week, and she has a lot of work to do with everything that we've just talked about.
They're all big weeks. Thank you, Katie. Katie Pavlich here in Washington. Thank you. Shannon, what's next?
Well, conservative reaction to the president's comments decidedly mixed.
I think he made some points that were factually right. There was violence on both sides in that event on Saturday.
What Trump did today was a moral disgrace.
More of that very tense exchange between Laura Ingraham and Charles Krauthammer as we debate where the president goes from here.
Also, Shannon, a key Senate primary now headed for a runoff. Why the president's pick might be in some trouble. We'll explain that.
And later today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions heads down to Miami to praise that city for what it's done to reverse its sanctuary city status. Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis is here to talk about that and much more.
Drug crimes, gang rapes, crimes against children, and murderers. Countless Americans would be alive today, and countless loved ones would not be grieving today if these policies of sanctuary cities were ended.
I'm an immigrant myself, but when it comes to when people are arrested here in Miami-Dade County to keep our citizens safe, we provide that information. We will hold and honor those detainer requests, and I think that that's the right policy.
So that's the mayor of Miami-Dade in Florida, vowing to uphold President Trump's policy on sanctuary cities. Now, the AG, Jeff Sessions, speaks there later today, praising that city for setting an example in immigration enforcement. I want to bring in the Congressman Ron DeSantis out of Florida, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as the Judiciary and Oversight Committees. And, sir, welcome back here to America's Newsroom. The AG is going to say in part the following on screen. Miami-Dade is an example of what is possible through hard work and a rededication to the rule of law. It is proof that the entire nation can do better. The most fundamental duty of government is to ensure the safety and liberty of its people. Why is Miami-Dade different from, say, San Francisco, Chicago, or pick another big city?
Because I think Miami-Dade is putting public safety above ideology. And in this instance, you've had people for years and years who've been arrested on very, very serious offenses, sexual assault, homicides, and then if they get bail, that information is not provided to ICE so that we can track and identify these people. And what we found is people who were known by these local authorities across the country to be in the country illegally have then gone on to commit more criminal offenses. And so I think Attorney General Sessions is exactly right. Had you just notified ICE and then had ICE enforce the law, those future crimes would not have been committed.
Well, you know, there's a threat from the White House that says we'll take away your federal money if you don't obey. Is Miami-Dade worried about losing money, sir?
Well, I think that they all should be. I mean, this idea that you're going to get money from the federal government but then try to undercut federal law and federal law enforcement, that just doesn't sit well with American taxpayers. It's also not good policy. So I'm sure that was a concern, but I think it's a totally legitimate concern, and I think that Sessions is right to, and the president's right, to use that and say, get with the program, otherwise then just deal with it on your own, and we're not going to be providing the federal spigot.
One more point on this. There's a clause in this about a detainer, which essentially means if you apprehend someone, you hold them for a period of time. In this case, it may be indefinitely, until the federal officials can get there. And if more action needs to be taken against that suspect, that action will be taken. That must be a critical aspect of this in places like Miami-Dade in order to clear and clarify the status of said individual. How significant is that, do you believe?
Well, I think it's very important. If you remember, one of the guys who used to campaign with the president, Jamil Shah, his son was killed by an illegal immigrant who, in Los Angeles, they did not do or honor the detainer request. So this guy had been booked on some serious gun charges. Everyone knew he was in the country illegally. He was released, and before he was able to go to trial, he killed Jamil's son. So I think it's very, very important for public safety.
3 o'clock this afternoon, Jeff Sessions will see the speech then. Sir, Speaker Paul Ryan sent out this tweet late yesterday during the president's news conference in New York City. He said, "We must be clear. White supremacy is repulsive. The bigotry is counter. This bigotry is counter to all this country stands for. There can be no moral ambiguity." Has there been ambiguity in the statements from the president over the past 3 to 5 days?
Well, I think his statement yesterday or on Monday was very strong. I think yesterday he was taking some shots at the left-wing groups. I gave an opening for the press to say, hey, you're trying to draw an equivalence here. The thing about these groups, Bill, is this was a national thing. They were bringing people from all over the country, and they got a few hundred people. I can get you 200 people in my district for a workshop on Social Security benefits. So this does not have a lot of purchase with the broader American public. And I think it's important, as we're condemning that, to also condemning them and their views, to also just remind people that this is not something that is gaining a lot of steam in American politics. And these guys really exist, I think, to provoke, and they exist outside the American political system in many ways.
Ron DeSantis, I'm out of time, but I thank you for yours today, the congressman from Florida. Thank you, sir, for coming back here. 21 past. Yep. Here's Shannon.
Well, President Trump's original reason for holding that press conference yesterday was to announce more details on his infrastructure plan, but clearly that's not what reporters wanted to discuss.
How about a couple of infrastructure questions?
All right, so we will discuss the impact of his latest proposal as he pushes for $1 trillion plan to rebuild our nation's roads, tunnels, and bridges. Plus, how much patriotism do military bands inspire? Turns out the government wants a better way to measure that kind of performance. We'll explain just ahead. President Trump rolling out yet another executive order aimed at speeding up approvals for his $1 trillion initiative for infrastructure projects, while at the same time scaling back environmental regulations.
So that can go out to 20 years. This shows about 10. But that could go out to about 20 years to get something approved. This is for a highway. This is less than 2 years. This is going to happen quickly. That's what I'm signing today. And by the way, if it doesn't meet environmental safeguards, we're not going to approve it. Very simple.
Joining us now, Melissa Francis, Fox Business anchor, an expert on all of these business issues that we're now fighting about. I mean, the president says, listen, it takes years and years and years to get some of these things done. He wants to stimulate the economy, pour that money in, and hopefully help private business in the process.
I mean, that was the amazing part of the news conference yesterday that everyone missed. Businesses were cheering all around the country. I mean, that's job creation. He talked about the fact that the Empire State Building here in New York was built in 11 months. Can you imagine if it was today, it would take 15 years. I mean, look what happened with the World Trade Center, the private building versus the public one that went back up, a difference of like a decade. It's something he knows about. He's going to streamline it. He talked about financing it, $200 billion. in government funds, but you can extrapolate that out to $1 trillion when you add in private investment. I mean, this was a huge home run, a really big deal, cutting down on those regulations and the time, just the permitting process. He announced like a permitting concierge, if you will, a lead agency that gets the project through all of the morass. It's just, it was an incredible announcement. It got totally lost. It would create jobs. It'd be great for anyone who drives on streets. I mean, that's sort of
heard of
if
these
you've
people.
used a bridge, this is good for you. It's jobs. It's great stuff. It got totally lost, but not to the business community who did hear it and is now counting on it.
You know, environmentalists are worried about this. The former director of public affairs for FEMA said that he, in rolling back some of the regulations from the Obama era, said that it was the most significant action taken in a generation, those regs. And he says now to get rid of them, eliminating the requirement is self-defeating. We can either build smarter now or put taxpayers on the hook to pay exponentially more when it floods, and it will.
I mean, we're not, this is totally different ends of the spectrum. I mean, he's not talking about destroying the environment. You heard him say right there, you know, if it doesn't make environmental sense, we're not going to do it. It's not about that. It's about the giant hoops that you have to jump through that prevent things from getting done. I mean, why do we set money aside and say we have shovel-ready jobs and the infrastructure never happens? A lot of it is because you can't get it done with the permitting process. It takes too long and people give up.
Okay. Speaking of other people giving up, there have been some who have abandoned the president's various economic councils, saying these various CEOs that they split with him on different political issues. My question, one of them is, don't you lose your voice in the process when you walk away from these councils? But we also, from someone who decided to stay, the CEO of Walmart, he did issue a statement. He's staying on. He says this, though, as we watch the events and the response from President Trump over the weekend, we too felt that he missed a critical opportunity to help bring our country together by unequivocally rejecting the appalling actions of white supremacists. Then they refer to the follow-up remarks he made and say his remarks today, meaning yesterday, were a step in the right direction. We need that clarity and consistency in the future. Do people want to hear from the CEOs? Do the shareholders
Not the
care about
shareholders.
this?
Not the shareholders. I mean, the shareholders say, I mean, this is a direct quote from somebody who sent me, I couldn't care less about that CEO's feelings, but he better light it up when he announces earnings on Thursday. That's not his job to have feelings. He can have feelings on his own time. When he is at work being paid as the CEO, he has a legal fiduciary responsibility to turn a profit. And if he decides to leave the council because that's better for profits, because his customers don't like whatever the president is doing, that's fine. That's his fiduciary responsibility. But if he's making a moral call about his feelings, leave your feelings at home and go to work as the CEO to turn a profit for your shareholders. That is your one and only legal responsibility as the CEO of that company. It is outrageous to see these CEOs behaving this way. It's inappropriate. They are supposed to do what's right for the people they work for, and those are the shareholders, and they better not forget that.
All right, so Walmart comes out on Thursday. We'll keep a close eye on that.
Yeah, absolutely. He better light it up, as that one shareholder
Quote,
said.
Unquote. All right, Melissa, great to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bill.
Markets open up in a minute. Meantime, Fox's alert now. Breaking news from Hawaii. The U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Army responding to reports of a downed helicopter off the coast of Oahu. The latest details and what we're learning about that breaking story in a moment. Also, the president blaming both sides, sparking a tense debate between two of our own. Our panel takes up this debate next.
I think his statement yesterday was clear and strong, and I think it was compassionate. I think he should have said it on Saturday. I have no idea why he didn't.
I'll tell you why he didn't say it on Saturday, which he made plain today, because that's not what's in his heart.
Word from Beijing, China now, urging the U.S. and North Korea to work toward a peaceful resolution. That call comes after a tense standoff spurred by the rogue regime's recent missile tests and threats to fire missiles toward Guam. North Korea standing down on that threat hours after China slapped sanctions on the regime's imports. President Trump responding on that move, tweeting, quote, Kim Jong-un of North Korea made a very wise and well-reasoned decision. The alternative would have been both catastrophic and unacceptable, end tweet.
As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
All right, the president doubling down on his comments from Saturday, saying both sides are to blame for the deadly weekend events in Charlottesville, sparking this back and forth between Charles Krauthammer and Laura Ingraham on Special Report.
To critique what he did today on the grounds that it distracts from the agenda or it was a tactical mistake, I believe is a cop-out. He reverted back to where he was on Saturday and made it very clear that what he read on Sunday, was it Monday? 2 days later, Monday, was a hostage tape.
I resent that you just said it was a cop-out, what I said on this set. To critique what he did today is what we were asked to do on the show tonight. We have to be honest about the evil of racism and also honest about the evil of a far left that is trying to tear down both history and intimidate free speech in the country. That is not defending neo-Nazis, it's not defending white supremacists, it's stating a fact about Antifa.
I never said he was defending neo-Nazis.
I think his statement yesterday was clear and strong, and I think it was compassionate. I think he should have said it on Saturday. I have no idea why he didn't.
You said you have no idea why he didn't say it on Saturday? I'll tell you why he didn't say it on Saturday, which he made plain today. Because that's not what's in his heart.
You can read a heart. Wow, you really are a PhD.
All right, Brad Blakeman, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, and political commentator Ben Kissel, host of the last podcast of The Left. Okay, gentlemen, a little awkward there between a couple of big names on the conservative right. But, Brad, they wouldn't even be having this awkward debate had he not taken those questions yesterday. He was supposed to be talking about infrastructure.
That's right. And look, he did take the bait because they know that the press puts out the chum and he takes the bait every time. If he was just a little bit more disciplined, his Saturday statement, his initial statement was fine. And then he spoke again on Monday, and he clarified his prior statement. Why? Because he had more facts about what was going on the ground and what transpired there. The president should have stood by his statement. End of story. Not entertain questions and talked about infrastructure. He chose to talk about Charlottesville. He made that decision.
Yeah, and Ben, the left has got to love that. They know he's going to take the bait because he feels personally challenged and offended by the fact that he laid this out. He clarified on Monday, and then yesterday it reignites.
I honestly don't think the left or the right like this. I think this is really traumatic right now.
You don't think the left likes this?
For the American people as a whole. Yeah, bipartisan. I believe this is a very serious issue. And I just want to say the name Heather Heyer, a name that's not been mentioned nearly enough, a victim during these attacks in Charlottesville, a woman trying to exercise.
Lost lives.
Sure, the police, exactly, the two officers that lost their lives. A victim trying to exercise her First Amendment right, mowed down by a domestic terrorist. I think what's happening right now is there is violence on the left, there is violence on the right, but the violence on Saturday was instigated by the right, and we have to take that as an isolated incident where the right needs to have ownership over that. The Unite the Right rally was the reason that Antifa showed up. They were the major instigators for the violence, and I think that the president really misspoke when he said that there were blame on both sides regarding Saturday's events.
Okay, but it is accurate to say there were reporters from the New York Times and somebody associated with the ACLU who were tweeting or putting out statements that they did see violence from the left, not equating these groups and what they're about, but saying that there were violent people on both sides. Is it fair to say that?
There was violence on both sides, and there's been a lot of violence in this country, and that's why we have to heal. And that's why what happened with Donald Trump on Saturday, what happened yesterday, is damaging to the country. And it shouldn't be lost on anyone that we have millions of Americans who believe that we have a Nazi sympathizer in the White House. I mean, this is very bad stuff.
We do not have a Nazi
I'm just saying that is what millions of people believe.
No, they do not believe that. They don't believe that. And that's the point, is I wouldn't take the reporting that we're seeing, the outrageous reporting and accusations against our president as fact, or that there are people out there by the millions who believe that. I don't believe that. And I believe that the president in his heart believes that the American people are united against all acts of violence and domestic terrorism. That's what I believe.
That's fine that you believe that. There are still many people, as we've seen on this network, who are openly crying because of what's happened and because of the rhetoric coming from this White House. It should be very easy for the President of the United States to stand up to white nationalists, to stand up to Nazis.
He did.
But then he also sort of had this caveat of but the other side as well. It's this but them world where, yes, they might be wrong on the right, but hey, look over here on the left. Both are wrong, and we need to acknowledge that.
Both were wrong. They're the left and the right fringes are damaging to our country.
I agree with that.
And the vast majority of Americans do not believe or identify with either side.
I agree with that.
We are good and decent people, and the president right now, I think, would help to unite the country and be more like Abe Lincoln instead of Roy Cohn. Being defensive and being combative is not what we need from our president at this time.
That's something that Krautheimer brought up as well last night. He said, listen, there have been terrible things. There have been Band-Aids along the way or progress along the way with, healing the wounds of the Civil War, eventually passing civil rights laws and things that have been, steps in the right direction. And over the last 50 or 60 years, he said, these younger generations have tried to heal those wounds and be a post-racist, racial kind of generation. But he said, this shows you that we're still a long way from healing those wounds. They were ripped open this weekend.
They were, and you wonder, Donald Trump is at 34% approval ratings in recent polls. You wonder if he is just horrified of giving up this very bizarre base that he was able to cobble together in 2016, and if he just feels as if he needs these fringe groups in order to maintain any level.
No, wait a second. The base who was attracted to Donald Trump is not the people that we've seen in Charlottesville. It's not. What we had in Charlottesville is a super minority of fringe people. It doesn't represent the majority of Americans.
We got to leave it there because we're out of time, but I think it's important that the people who are his base, the millions of people who voted for him, do not want to be lumped in with these people. They find that very offensive.
Exactly. The people in Wisconsin and my home state who voted for him did not vote for him because he's a white nationalist.
Exactly. Yes. All right, gentlemen, you did have some points of agreement. We thank you very much for the conversation. Bill, back to you.
Hot stuff, Shannon. Thank you. In a moment here, the race to fill a critical Senate seat once held by the AG Jeff Sessions, now headed for a highly contested runoff. Why the president's pick might be in trouble. We'll take that up in a moment. Also, more questions on the future of Steve Bannon. Is his position safe in the West Wing today?
I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon. But he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
Well, I can't help what they do behind doors in Washington, D.C. Of course, I support the president's agenda. I have supported him throughout, and I don't know why he did what he did, but that's his decision, not mine.
So then, Alabama Senate candidate Justice Roy Moore earlier today on President Trump's decision to endorse his opponent, incumbent Senator Luther Strange. These two men are now headed for a runoff after yesterday's election. Moore came in first, beating Strange by about 6 points. I want to bring in John McCormick, senior writer, Weekly Standard, with me in studio. Nice to see you, John. Good morning to you. Yeah. Trump won Alabama by 30 points. He was all in on Luther Strange, and so is Mitch McConnell. What do they have on the line here?
Well, Mitch McConnell thinks that Luther Strange is a strong ally, and people like Roy Moore and Mo Brooks are going to be sort of these anti-establishment people who would buck the leadership. It turns out that a lot of people actually like that in Alabama. Roy Moore is very controversial on the national stage. His social conservatism can kind of veer into an almost sort of anti-Americanism at times. He's suggested that Putin might be right, that America is actually a source of evil in the world. But you know what? People end up liking him. He came in first place, and Luther Strange came in second. No one knows how this is going to shake out in the end, but Roy Moore definitely has the edge going.
I think the Roy Moore has the edge, you're saying.
We don't know how it's going to shake out in the runoff. But.
Understood. But it's a very interesting divide now, you see, and evangelicals love Roy Moore. He was the judge who stood up to the government when they tried to remove the Ten Commandments out of the judicial building in Alabama. And he did it twice, and that won him great favor among them.
That's built up a big support among evangelical Christian voters in Alabama, but Moore is still controversial even in Alabama. So if you look back to 2012, Moore won, after he left the Supreme Court, he won another Supreme Court race in 2012. He only won with 52% of the vote, running about 9 points behind Mitt Romney. So a whole bunch of people who voted for Mitt Romney didn't vote for Roy Moore back in 2012. You think that whichever Republican wins this runoff is probably going to be the next senator from Alabama, but you never know for sure. I mean, when the president's job approval rating is in the 30s, when you have two controversial candidates, like both Luther Strange and Roy Moore are controversial for different reasons, you never know what's going to happen. But likely odds, Republicans going to win this.
Here was the tweet from the president yesterday. Big day in Alabama. Vote for Luther Strange. He will be great. Here was the tweet earlier today. Congratulations to Roy Moore and Luther Strange for being the final two and heading into a September runoff in Alabama. Exciting race. Here is the headline from Politico now. Trump and McConnell will try to avoid Alabama embarrassment. Is it at that level?
Well, you know, I think would be an embarrassment for McConnell, certainly. Trump seems like he doesn't want to risk too much political capital. I mean, that statement today, this morning, was pretty tepid. He didn't say, now bring Luther Strange over the finish line. It was congrats to both candidates, exciting race. So we'll see exactly how that shakes out. I think this race is going to get pretty nasty. You know, both sides are going to focus on ethical questions. With Luther Strange was appointed by the very unpopular former governor who resigned in disgrace, and Roy Moore has been attacked by the Senate leadership PAC, this PAC aligned with Mitch McConnell, saying that he took, you know, $1 million over 10 years with this Christian Legal Foundation, this charity. So I think that's where this is heading. Both sides going to try and play and sort of talk about ethics.
I see so many themes running through this race. You could talk about an establishment or anti-establishment vote. You can talk about the religious vote on the side of evangelicals, the strength of Donald Trump, which I believe is still there in Alabama. Do we read too much into a vote in this state at this stage in this presidency, at this stage in a Congress that really hasn't had the key achievement yet?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's a low turnout summer primary. I think it will be more interesting what happens in the general election, even if the Republican wins, just to see where they are. You know, Alabama's typically a state where a Republican can win with 60% of the vote. I mean, if a Republican just squeaks by with, you know, 50% or even just there's a shocking loss, you know, that's possible. I mean, Massachusetts is about as Democratic as Alabama is Republican. And you got to recall in 2010, what happened? A Republican won Ted Kennedy's Senate seat just a year after Obama won election. So, you know, that would just really show you that Republicans are in for a world of hurt in 2018 if they...
Wow, you see that as a possibility?
A slim chance, but, you know, who would have thought that Massachusetts could have gone Republican in 2010? So I wouldn't rule anything out at this point.
Well, Donald Trump's strength down there was pretty well founded.
Pretty well founded.
In the primary season and in the general election, and we'll see what sort of pool he has now. Thank you, sir. John McCormack. Nice to see you in person, finally, huh, from the Weekly Standard.
Great to see you.
Thank you, John. Shannon, what's next?
Well, it is music that's supposed to evoke patriotism and inspire our troops. Now, the government isn't so sure that the mission fits in the budget. We'll explain that just ahead.